Guns! Guns!
Let's get straight to it. By the end of this video, you're going to know about the settings and strategies that you need in order to make these style of engravings on aluminum with a fiber laser. This video is part of my fiber laser series, but it's also part of my build series sponsored by Big Kahuna Guns. And remember, viewers, failing to like and subscribe is a leading cause of eczema. And when I say these styles, I'm talking about simple engraving with images. I'm talking about text engraving. I'm talking about multi-layer engraving of images. And we'll also discuss how you can work to get different depths and what depths you can expect with different strategies. So this is obviously going to be great for aesthetic engravings, such as you see here, but also for more functional engravings like fire and safe markings or serial numbers if you are getting your fiber laser as an FFL. Lastly, there are a few rules I'll be repeating every episode. 1, this is not an intro into setting up your new laser. There are a million videos which cover that already. Go watch them. We're going to focus solely on applying your already set up fiber laser to firearms uses. 2, I will be teaching all of this on an OhmTech 50-watt compact model, but no part of me can recommend OhmTech or this model with a clear conscience. Get something else. If you want to know why, go watch episode 2. 3, you do not have to have the same wattage, lens size, brand, or anything else as me besides it being a fiber laser in order to follow along. Episode 1 already taught you how to convert whatever I say here to the settings you need for your laser. While you still may want to tweak them afterwards, what you'll get should be plenty good to go use immediately without fear of ruining parts. 4, as with most of my content, I'm learning this at the same time you are, which means these settings did not come out of my brain. This episode's settings come with thanks to Frag Out Designs because they were derived from being able to peek into his little black book. Everything we're going to be doing for this engraving is some variation on the following settings. There is the deep path, and that is at speed 900, max power 45, frequency 60. And we're doing a fill mode at 0.03 millimeters, bidirectional crosshatch, 45-degree scan angle, but we are going to auto-rotate with an angle increment of 22, so it is constantly changing the angle that it's in doing the engraving at so that we get nice coverage with non-overlapping lines and all that sort of fun stuff to hopefully get a nice clean floor on our engraving. We are doing 10 passes of that as our norm. I say norm because you'll see this is one of the variables that we are going to change. And we are going to do 3 global passes of the combination of this deep plus clean. So our clean is after we do those 10 crosshatch passes of our deep engraving at these settings, it's gonna every 10 come back and do 2 directions, because it's crosshatched still, of a cleaning path. So that is a high frequency, low power path. And you can actually watch when I show you the engraving, it moves much faster and has a completely different sound to it. So if we're doing 3 global passes, what it's going to do is we are going to have 10 crosshatches of the deep, followed by 1 crosshatch of the clean, and repeat 3 times. So that's what that global passes is. We are also going to be modifying the global passes setting for the various paths we're going to do here. But again, every single thing we're doing here today is some variation of these 2 sub layers, as they call them, and these settings. As you can see, I've already been doing some tests beforehand, but there's a couple of tests that I specifically want to do with you guys watching. The first one that we're going to do is you can see that I've both scuffed up this side of the aluminum with 120 grit sandpaper, as well as put some pretty decently sized scratches in it. And then this last little section here that I'm going to use is sandblasted and clean. So we're going to run our standard style of path for aluminum deep engraving, not too deep, just deep enough to see what happens, on this nice clean section, on the scratched and marred section, and then we're going to do it again on the scratched and marred section, but we're going to do a pre-cleaning pass, not just a cleaning path on the end, and see how it handles those. The other thing we're going to do experiment-wise is we're going to take this empty space here and we are going to incrementally bump up how many global passes of our deep engraving we do, and we're going to mic those to see just how deep we get with certain increments and numbers of passes in aluminum. Let's look at the results of our test, and it's these 3 swatches right here that haven't been sandblasted like everything else. And to remind you, this was just our standard settings with a few passes. This was our standard setting with a few passes over scratches, and this was a pre-clean with our standard settings with the same number of few passes over scratches. And obviously it's going to be easier to tell in person, but all 3 are almost exactly the same. On this one, you can kind of see a little bit of scratch mark going through there and going through there. I'm going to try and catch that as best I can, which is odd because that was the one with the pre-clean, but I had to get the extra light out in order to shine on here at a nice angle so that you guys could see that. Without some really nice lighting, it's almost impossible to see those scratches coming through or anything but just a nice perfect bottom. So I don't think we need to do the pre-clean, at least on aluminum. These 6 swatches here, and don't mind the marks, that was from my depth gauge, which is hardened steel, so it marred the surfaces. But this was 3 passes of engraving with the clean, 6 with clean, 9 with clean, 15 with clean, 10 clean, and then another 10 in clean. And this was 3 iterations of that 10 plus clean. So a total of 30 engraves and 3 cleans. Let's talk about what we got in terms of depth. We got 2.5 thousandths, 4 thousandths, 5 thousandths, 8, 10, and 13.5 thousandths of an inch. We definitely have differences in how deep we can get with the number of passes. It is not linear, which I found quite interesting. And just for extra fun, I wondered, is there a difference between 6061 aluminum and 7075? Because you might be engraving a billet lower versus a forged lower. The answer was no. Well, the answer was probably no. There were differences, but they were so marginal that I'm almost inclined to chalk up the differences, not to the materials in question, but just to variation that you might expect. I saw variation even within 6061 when I was doing tests on the magnitude that we're talking here. But in case you're curious, it was 2 thousandths, 3 thousandths, 4.5 thousandths, 8 thousandths, 10 thousandths, and 12 thousandths. Let's talk about the graphic that we're going to use. So in this case, I drew out a 50 BMG bullet and then just a normal safe in a font that I like. But notice that I did place correctly, based on measurements of an AR15, a couple of locating items like holes, as well as the angle of the bottom of my magwell area on this custom lower. And then I've got this cool mushroom cloud graphic that is actually 2 pieces. It is an extract from a bitmap image that is 2 different settings. I'm not going to go into how to use Inkscape, but Inkscape is what I'm using here, and it is a piece of free software, so you don't have to own Adobe Illustrator if you want to get into this sort of stuff. I then exported that as a SVG, and that is what got me here. I ungrouped them so that I could put them on their own layers, so that I could assign different engraving values to these various pieces. For example, I wanted a decently deep engraving for the fire and safe. I then wanted a slightly less deep engraving for the path of the bullet that you see here in yellow. I then knew that after I did all that, I would have to change my focus because the magwell area is up higher. And so I split off the next section of the path of the bullet. It's going to use the exact same parameters with one slight change we'll talk about in a minute. As the yellow path, just I split it up so that I could do a pause, change my focus, and then run the second area. And then I've got the two different sections of my mushroom cloud split up as well, so that I can do the larger piece at one depth and then come back and do the more focused blue piece here at a even deeper amount. We are going to use the standard engraving pattern that we talked about at the beginning. The only thing that we're going to be modifying for almost all of these things is simply how much of it we're going to use, so the number of repetitions and passes. So for my bullet, I'm going to be doing one global set of passes, but I am going to do 15 of the passes for the deep engraving on that one. If we then come to the bullet path, I'm doing one global pass for both the deep and clean, but I'm only doing 9 passes of the deep engraving. So just ever so slightly less than we did for the green. However, when we get over to our mushroom cloud, for the larger of the two sections, I'm doing one global pass at 10 deep engravings followed by the cleaning. And then it's going to come back and it's going to engrave on top of that even more, but a smaller section with this blue. And that is 2 additional global passes at 10 deep engravings and a clean each. And then finally, we've got the orange path, which is just the second half of the bullet travel. And it's the same number of passes. The only thing that I did different here is I tried the fill shapes individually instead of fill all shapes at once like I did for the yellow. But in the end result, it really didn't do anything here, so pick whichever one you like. The only place that we stray from any of this is my red layer here, and that is just these 3 lines that I wanted very faintly on the actual 50 BMG bullet, just to give it a little feel of a 3-dimension, ever so slight feel of that. And it's just line mode, it's not even a hatch filling. And you can see the parameters there. So now that we've discussed the strategy we're going to use, let's talk about how we did the actual setup. As you can see here, we've got our various layers and the ability to turn off their on and off their output and framing, as well as whether they are visualized on our work surface here. So the first thing we're going to do is I've got all of the holes that I'm going to use for my alignment set up on this T1 section here. And so what I did is I turned everything off from output, and I turned on just the framing of that tool, and that allowed us to come over here and hit frame. And as you can see, it's going to put up just those 3 holes, and I can use that to align my lower to the machine. I can then come back and turn that off, and then turn on just the 3 paths that I'm going to be engraving on the fire control group area of the lower. And I'll also frame those, again, just to make sure that I am really hitting things where I want and everything is in a safe place before I go and hit the start button. And then hit the start button. Once we have the entire fire control group set of paths engraved, what we're going to do is we are going to hold down the lower to make sure it doesn't move, and then I'm going to use my measuring stick to change the focus so that we're now focused at the height of the top of the magwell section, which is where we're going to do the rest of our engraving. Once I've got that set up, I'm going to make sure that nothing shifted, and the way that I'm doing that is I'm turning on the framing for both of my tools here. And that's going to be the 3 holes as well as the line for the bottom of my magwell. And that again just makes me comfortable that everything is lined up and nice and ready to go. I'll once again turn those off, and then I will turn on the 3 layers that we're actually going to engrave on this surface. I will again frame those just to make sure I'm engraving where I want and I'm not hitting anything that I'm not intending to. And let's start. And there we have it. Don't mind it being a little dirty. Apparently my hands were covered in some schmutz, so when I just brushed it off, I brushed some down in there. But I'm going to throw it into the sandblast cabinet in just a second, and we'll get a nice, better view of what everything looks like. And if you're wondering what I did on the other side, I just did the same safe and big bullet. I might put something here, who knows. But for now, calling that done. That looks fantastic, cleared up. I do like the double layer effect that I did. That's pretty cool. The only thing that I would change in hindsight is that first layer. I would probably do it a little less aggressively, just to make the difference in the 2 layers more apparent. And then the other thing is it did end up leaving some very thin, fragile highlights where the full thickness is left in a couple places. So I would probably modify that strategy just a little bit. Another thing that I want to add to this retrospective is if we think back to where we got these from, he's using a massive lens, 330 millimeters. I mean, that's over double the lens size that I'm using. And so that makes sense that we ended up with power settings that were below 50%. He has no choice but to do that because of his large lens, and he's already running at 100%. But something tells me if we wanted to speed up the times that it takes to do an engraving like this, we probably could bump those power numbers up pretty safely without messing too much with the final result. But regardless, I'm really excited by this, and I want to get some Cerakote on it.